here have experience with MLPs and in the partnership world. Although the burden shifting doesn't apply there in the partnership side, many of the principles we'll discuss are applicable to the partnership world, in part because even though the partnerships specifically address conflicts, the very best practices of the corporate world will help you as a director on a partnership GP.
Right.
Carin, just imagine that you're asked to serve on a board, on a special committee for a particular project. What should a director have in mind before taking on that assignment?
I think there's three common factors that come into play, at least my experience with special committees. First is, you know there's going to be a heightened level of scrutiny. Second is, you know the potential of liability, meaning litigation, is going to go up. And then third, I reference my family a lot. I have a nephew who asks me if I make a request, is it an energy giver or is it an energy taker request? And special committees, in the best of circumstances, take a lot of time. And so you, as a person who might be asked to be on that special committee, you have to realize that it is an inordinate amount of time to do it right. And it just, you know, by the time you're hiring advisors, separate counsel, figuring out a communication structure with respect to your committee, with respect to your fellow board members, with respect to the management team, and also recognizing the issues of communication. I've had the opportunity to serve in Washington and a privilege to be a commissioner of the Department of Public Safety in Texas. So I have a heightened awareness of what is discoverable. And all of a sudden, everything just takes more time.
Al, you've worked with 50 special committees or more.
Probably more.
Maybe more. What characterizes a good director in a special committee engagement? And without names, what characterizes some of the poor directors that you've come across?
You referred to relationships play into this, or people have a sensitivity in terms of relationships. I'm reminded of Carl Icahn's comments that if you want a friend, buy a dog. And that's something that people should remember when they take a special committee role. Friendships don't matter. You're sitting on the other side of the table. You need to have respectful relationships as you would in any arm's length negotiations. But you always have to remind yourself that in the context of the role that you're being asked to play, this is an arm's length role. So the people that I have observed that are good with respect to this have remembered that. And in addition, you referred to this as well, you got to spend the time on these things. And some of these take some turns that you would never imagine. They take time in terms of really pushing if it is a controlling shareholder, the party on the other side of the table that is involved. You have to question their assumptions as you would any third-party transactions. You have to work with your advisors, and one of the things I always say to committees when we're being interviewed, you almost have to think of us not just as your typical investment banker, which is on the other side of a management team. You have to think of us in some respects as replacing that management team and working with you directly. So I spend a lot more time talking directors when I am on a special committee than I do if I'm just representing a company in a normal transaction. So the comfortable working relationship with the advisors. The people who are not good are the people who don't remember that they're on the other side of the table and are not willing to spend the time with respect to it, and don't fully realize that it's not just enough to do what they think it's the right thing. I always say that special committees are a little bit M&A under a microscope. It's not only enough to do the right thing, you have to create a record to show that you've done the right thing. You need to be prepared for what will likely be litigation.
Yeah, and to underscore what Al's saying, in order to get the benefits of forming the special committee, process is everything. My partner David Sterling reminds boards of that all the time. And I think the common theme that you're hearing here is that at the end of the day, both the committee members and the rest of the board are going to come away from the experience finding the process, well, finding it all far more process-oriented, far more time-consuming, and unfortunately far more expensive than any of them had anticipated or would like.
Lee, you're in that first meeting. The committee's just been set. We hear all the time about it's harder than it used to be, that the courts will look deeply into whether the affiliates vacation with members of the special committee or not. No questionnaire is ever going to reveal that. What do you do if you're the lawyer? What do you do if you're the special committee member? How do you even put that on the table?
Well, typically what happens is a general counsel is going to recognize the need to form a special committee, and that's usually the first step. And what invariably happens is that an assessment is made at that time and who would be the best candidates who fit both the disinterested and independence test. Perhaps they don't do the full deep dive in looking at that independence that should be done. But once that committee is formed, the committee is going to select their own outside counsel, and I think the burden then falls on the committee's counsel to relook at the independence at each one of these candidates and ask the tougher questions. Do that second and third level dive to really find out whether or not these committee members will have the ability to make a decision and not be influenced by anything other than the merits of the transaction and not bring any personal or other considerations into play. And that could be looking into whether the social relationships between the committee members and the interested director, the family relationships, the financial relationships that go pretty far outside the initial circle, whether they serve on similar boards, whether one committee member may be on the board of directors of a foundation and the interested director is a donor. Those are the kinds of things that falls on the committee council to look at.
Al, has the environment internally at the opinion committee at Lazard changed in the past 5, 10, 15 years in view of the greater scrutiny of the transactions? What's different now than it was before?
I'm not sure it's changed as much in the last 5 to 10 years, but certainly in the last 20 years, it is. I look at my friend Nat Gregory, who was a partner of Lazard in the 80s, or at least early 90s, and as these processes started. The fact is, fairness opinions have developed in terms of rigor in accordance with the case law in Delaware. And what we used to could do of say, well, we think that risk factors and such, that this deserves a 12% discount rate. You can't do that anymore. And so we have, and in fairness, this was probably developed in the last 5 to 10 years. We now have a written set of guidelines as to what a banker must do in terms of how to do the analysis behind a fairness opinion. How do you calculate a discount rate? What betas people should be using, what the source of that should be, in such a way that it is very clear when he has to defend that fairness opinion, it is based upon guidance from the firm as compared to an individual banker in the context of a deal making a decision that he's going to weigh it one way or the other in order to produce a result. So he can blame it on the firm and its policies, or say, and there's a basis for the firm and its policies. And to the extent that there's any deviation, which sometimes there needs to be, that it is presented to the committee and noted in the committee, the Fairness Opinion Committee, that we made the following change to our policy for the following reason. But it is a firm decision, not a banker decision.
Lee, imagine the following hypothetical. The director from the special committee says to you, look, this is going to happen. I know it's going to happen. It's inevitable. If I don't go along with this transaction, the affiliate, the CEO, is going to do a tender offer to the holders. I can try to push. I can do the best I can. But we live in a world today where I can get kicked off this board and somebody else is going to come in and do it. It's going to happen. What do I do?
Don't serve on the committee. I mean, we talked a little bit before about, in order for this to work, either to get the burden shift you're looking for or potentially to get business judgment rule application, for any of this to work, the committee has to have both the substantive and procedural authority. Substantive authority is the authority to say no. And it's not just it's not enough for the board resolution and the charge to the committee to say that it has the authority to say no, but the directors need to understand it. And there are situations, there have been cases in the courts where directors have testified that, notwithstanding what the committee resolution was, they thought they had to approve a transaction. They thought it was going to happen anyway, and they thought they just needed to get the best deal they could. And then the whole process falls, the bottom falls out. Everything goes away. It's a failed process, and nothing works.